sister's a therapist and I tell jokes. We both want to help all kinds of folks.
Hello, and welcome to My Sister's a Therapist. My name is Virginia Jones. I'm a stand-up comedian, but my sister, Laura Ryan, she's a therapist.
I'm Laura Ryan, licensed marriage and family therapist, but my main credit is sister to Quip specialist, Virginia Jones.
I have no idea what day it is or what time it is, and I have a little cold. How are you?
I'm well. I know what day and what time it is, and I don't have a cold.
Well, aren't you together? Aren't you just little Miss Togetherness? What are we talking about this week?
This week is a listener email from Kendra. If anyone wants us to make an episode or has a great idea for a topic, you can send them to hello@mysistersatherapist.com. So this is what Kendra said. Hello, Laura and Virginia. I'd love to hear an episode about gender roles and the difference in socialization of girls and boys and how it affects us as adults. I'd like to have the same confidence as a mediocre man when dealing with people, but I'm exhaustingly nice and give way too many chances. I don't see a lot of men having a hard time with the word no. Anywho, great show.
Kendra, thank you so much for the question. Thank you for listening. Actually, I had a great example of this last night. I am in a comedy festival and I ran into a guy who I knew was a comic in Los Angeles. And we had a brief conversation where he has a crush on one of my friends and he basically like grilled me about her and what she was up to. And I wasn't particularly nice to him. And I saw him being a little taken aback by it because I haven't seen him in many years. And I used to just be nice by default. But I truly do not care what this man thinks of me. I will be polite, but I'm not engaging. I think that that's our default, is to engage and be nice to especially men in our professional lives, especially our peers. Making a decision not to do so is refreshing.
It also involves difficulty because people get upset. I saw this TikTok where this woman decided she was going to respond to emails and texts in the exact way that her male colleagues did. Mm-hmm. And they all got really, really pissed off. You've got a bug up your butt. What's up with your attitude? And then she would cut and paste messages that they had written her. Yeah. And show them, hey, this is exactly how you talk to me every day of the week. So why do I have to use flowery language and exclamation points and emojis just to have conversations with you?
Yeah, it's a fun experiment to see how it feels if you write texts and short messages without exclamation points, because it does make everything feel very harsh, but it's just a normal way that people talk. I had this conversation with my new boss, who I like a lot, but she had a chat with me because she felt that I'd been too direct in an email to a man. And she was like, well, we just kind of want to be like a bit softer and like kind of dance around it a little bit.
Can you explicitly share with me what that means?
When I got her message, I was like, oh, maybe I was mean. And I looked at the message, I'm like, no, I was just direct and I didn't make any apologies. And it is not accepted for men and women to communicate the same way.
I got into trouble with that when I was working at Positive Changes. They referred to me as the drill sergeant because they felt like I was the most intense of any of the employees.
Part of Kendra's message that speaks to me is the part about treating your male peers differently than they treat you, always going out of your way to be supportive, to give them positive feedback. And I find that they don't feel the need to do that to you because they don't feel that you're their equal. The men who are extremely positive with me just based on human interaction, who haven't seen my comedy, are few. They assume that I kind of suck because they have it in their heads that women kind of suck.
I don't even think it's that they kind of suck. It's that women are going to step into line and I am superior to you. You may not be an inherently bad person, but I am an inherently better person than you. Is that biological?
Wow. I think that people think that it might be. I think it's entirely societal. All of society is based on a biblical idea that women came second and that women are ever so slightly inferior to men. And the reactions that we're getting from men in society, TikTok, social media, they're really having a hard time with women's equality because they didn't realize that it was going to cost them something.
Right.
Men have been saying for a long time, oh yeah, women should be equal. Women should have the same opportunities. And that's true. But it also means that they don't get to talk to us the same way they have. They don't get to treat us the same way they have. And that's hard because that's something that you have to learn. And people don't like to learn and they don't like change.
I think people also don't like the idea that I have been given an unfair advantage in life. And when I actually set the stage so that everyone is starting off at the same beginning point, that means that it's going to be harder for me. I'm actually going to have to try more. And that's not very fun. Gender role socialization begins at birth and continues through the life course. Our society is quick to outfit male infants in blue and girls in pink, even applying those color-coded gender labels while the baby is still in the womb. This color differentiation is quite new. Prior to the 1940s, boys wore pink and girls wore blue. In the 19th century and early 20th century, boys and girls wore dresses, mostly white, until the age of 6 or 7, which was also time for the first haircut. Children learn at a young age that there are distinct expectations for boys and girls. Cross-cultural studies reveal that children are aware of gender roles by age 2 or 3. At 4 or 5, most children are firmly entrenched in culturally appropriate gender roles. Children acquire these roles through socialization, a process in which people learn to behave in a particular way as dictated by societal values, beliefs, and attitudes.
And think about how we go out of our way to establish gender in infants. A bald little girl is given a headband with a flower on it. They used to always put babies in dresses, which is convenient when you have someone in diapers. But now little boys have to wear pants.
Right.
So
and I had to unsnap every button of said pants
Right.
to change their diaper.
Over and over again to change their diaper.
Because I want strangers to know that my child is a boy.
It comes out of the awkwardness of people not knowing whether to call your child pretty or handsome and strong and a heartbreaker.
And smart. I think the word for boys is usually smart and girls is usually pretty. You and I have talked about this. We even have whole parties about gender reveal. And the one reveal that comes out is that most parents don't want girls.
Especially men don't want girls. People are killing themselves at gender reveals by accident at an unprecedented rate as the reveals become literally explosive. And I think that that's going to take down a lot of cis people, which is probably going to be a good thing. Talking about Eve, in a lot of biblical traditions, not the King James Bible that we as white people know, Eve was not Adam's first wife. There was Lilith, for whom the Lilith fair was named. And she and Adam were made at the same time, and she was his equal. And Adam did not like it. And she left the Garden of Eden and was replaced by Eve, who was made from a part of Adam. So she would always be subservient to him. It was like an older brother syndrome. He had a little more experience and had a little more on the ball. And she was always going to obey him.
In the King James version of the Bible, there were lots of liberties taken, but one of them was that in the original text, Adam cut himself in half in the Christian Bible, and she was half of him. And they changed that to say that she was a rib. So she was even less than half.
Right.
She was just a very small part of him, which creates that hierarchy where I am number 1 and you're number, 6? If I'm a whole human being and you're my rib, what is that?
Double standards do not only hurt women. In relationships, I think a lot of double standards are also bad for men. Women who want to snuggle, women who cry, they're normal. And men who want to snuggle, men who want to cry are needy and weak.
Well, I was having this conversation with a woman this week where she was saying that for her, crying is just not acceptable because she's been in the military and she's a tough old broad and yada, yada. And I said, okay, so what you're telling me is that you're experiencing internalized misogyny where crying is a weakness.
You've been socialized primarily with men. The military is mostly men. And the way that women have figured out how to be in the military is being as masculine as they can be.
Exactly.
The same thing happens at work. The way women for a long time have figured out how to exist in the workforce is to be just as tough as a man and just as this and that as a man.
And that's bad for both groups.
Right.
I think trying to be tough all the time isn't good for men either. It's been found that fathers are firmer in their expectations for gender conformity than their mothers, and their expectations are stronger for sons than they are for daughters. This is true in many types of activities, including preference for toys, playstyles, discipline, chores, and personal achievement. As a result, boys tend to be particularly attuned to their father's disapproval when engaging in an activity that might be considered feminine, like dancing or singing.
I was talking with a comic last night who on Thanksgiving had watched a bunch of episodes of MILF Island.
I've unfortunately seen that.
It's really interesting because you have your expectations of what the show is going to be. A bunch of younger men meet a bunch of hot old ladies. And when I say old, I mean, of course, over 30. But they bring the boys' fathers onto the island. The series that he was seeing is fathers. Because he said, and then it became fascinating watching men who had been confident and well-spoken and sure of themselves crumble when they were placed with their fathers. And keep in mind that men who submit themselves to a dating show on television are probably not the emotionally healthiest. You're selecting for a specific group of men who have troubled family backgrounds. But yeah, my friend Ben is like, I became totally uninterested in the dating part and of these women saying, I'm going to bring him out of his shell, and totally fascinated with watching how most of these men have terrible relationships with their fathers and are still beholden to them and still want to impress them into adulthood.
It's super sad to watch because gender is made up. It's not real. I'm trying to uphold this thing that doesn't even exist. Do you think it might negatively affect women long term?
Do you think that these are leading questions? Speaking of gender is made up, so many things that men today are terrified of their sons exhibiting or being interested in, wigs and makeup and high heels. Those were all masculine things. In the court of Louis XIV, that was what you wore just to get out of bed and go to court.
Right.
High heels were good to keep you in the saddle on a horse. For a long time, women weren't allowed to wear them.
Joy Nash covers that. She said, during the Middle Ages in Europe, high heels were exclusively for men rather than women. They were seen as a sign of masculinity depending on their height. This shows that the attributes people connect with traditional gender categories were very different only a few centuries ago and cannot be used as a reliable basis for establishing roles today.
The thing is that people's lives are short. Individual people's lives are short. And the things that we think of as unassailable traditions and just the way things are, that's pretty short too. So how does it affect women to operate with double standards? I mean, it's terrible. Women are brought up not to feel like we can do stuff alone, to put the goal at the center of their life, having a relationship with a man, and in many cases, having children with a man.
It also affects them professionally. So schools subtly convey messages to girls indicating they're less intelligent or less important than boys. For example, in a study of teacher responses to male and female students, data indicated that teachers praised male students far more than female students. Teachers interrupted girls more often and gave boys more opportunities to expand on their ideas.
There's a lot of studies about actual performance in school. Girls perform better in math testing right before teenagehood, and then they've already received the message they're not supposed to. And when you start hitting puberty is when you see girls, if they are smart, downplaying that because it is not a desired trait. They're not just getting that from their parents or television. The very people who were supposed to educate them, who are mostly women, have internalized a really crummy rhetoric that
they're just not as good.
Slightly less good.
Sounds pretty generously less good. All of these things are affecting children, women, like you mentioned, commercials. Mass media serves as another significant agent of gender socialization. In television and movies, women tend to have less significant roles and are often portrayed as wives or mothers. When women are given a lead role, it often falls into one of two extremes: a wholesome saint-like figure or malevolent hypersexual figure. Television commercials and other forms of advertising also reinforce inequality and gender-based stereotypes. Women are almost exclusively present in ads promoting cooking, cleaning, or childcare-related products. Think of the last time you saw a man star in a dishwasher or laundry detergent commercial. In general, women are underrepresented in roles that involve leadership, intelligence, or a balanced psyche.
When I was acting and going out for commercial roles, and I used to have a joke about it, but it's sad, really. The only roles that there were fun-loving mom and retired sex worker.
Your two opportunities.
Those are my two opportunities. Do you want to be a fun-loving mom or a retired sex worker? And I experienced that there's several different other kinds of women than that.
Not sure where you got that idea.
But screenwriters don't agree. So on the topic of advertising, I just saw this online. The game Battleship, where you are trying to puzzle out the placement of ships on a map that you can't see. Parker Brothers reintroduced it with a retro package, but they changed the packaging because the original game had a boy and his father playing Battleship, having a great time. But in the background, you can see mother and a daughter doing dishes, smiling at the boys having a fun time.
Admiring their Battleship game from a distance.
Yeah, they scrubbed those women. Why did those women even need to be in there in the the first place. If it's just a guy and his dad playing Battleship, women don't need to be part of the conversation, looking on approvingly while they do chores that keep the household running.
They're reminding us that this is what life is like. Boys and men have time to have fun and play, and women are doing domestic labor, but loving it also. I recently saw an ad where a guy was doing dishes. I think he was using a foaming Dawn dishwashing liquid, but he was washing nachos off of a plate. So it was during some sort of football thing. So they still had to make it hyper masculine, even though he was doing dishes.
At my house, someone that I knew needed a haircut and his regular place was shut. And I said, well, if you just need like a regular haircut, you can go like to a Sports Clips. And he shuddered at the idea of walking into some place called Sports Clips. I'm like, it's not got anything to do with sport. They're just calling it that so that men can walk in and get a haircut and not feel emasculated. Something that society has decided we do, but we wouldn't want to say like salon, or when men get their haircut, it's at a barber shop, or they could, if they had to, go to a Sports Clip.
I'm going to start a barbershop called Boob Clips. And I'm just going to have women dressed like Hooters models. But then that's going to be a problem because then they're going to have hair all over their
boobs.
Chests. Hairy boobs are not the move.
No, that's not feminine. Speaking of women on television, in the 90s, there was a television show called The X-Files, and that was my favorite. And it was about two FBI agents, one of whom was a woman who was also a doctor. Shocker. Dana Scully, played by Gillian Anderson. 63% of women who work in STEM now and grew up while The X-Files was airing cited Agent Scully as a model. They saw that a woman could be a scientist. This is called the Scully effect. And not only did she pave the way for young girls to be interested in STEM careers, she's also paved the way for other female characters in television. Bones, from the television show Bones, is a woman. Sydney Bristow in Alias, and Zoe Washburn from Firefly. There's a third kind of woman you can be, a
STEM woman in a male-dominated
field.
Our sister, Emily, used to work for Girls Start, where young girls around age 4th or 5th grade were brought into these after-school programs for girls to encourage them to pursue STEM as a career goal.
And that's also been her career. Even the small age difference between us and our sister, I think that she had different expectations around what she could do. I am a feminist. I've thought that women should be equal for a long time, but I have an art degree because that was one of the things that I felt like women could do when I grew up. It was still teacher, nurse, fashion designer.
I remember asking our mother, why did you become a teacher? You don't seem to have a real interest in children. Or teaching. And she said, well, it was either teacher or nurse. So that's what I picked.
Those are the two things. And I don't like blood. A funny series on Saturday Night Live that I have enjoyed about women's roles in media is the Totino's party roll commercials that Vanessa Bayer starred in. It's a woman making snacks for a bunch of guys watching the big game, and she is trapped in the kitchen, so much so that the back of Totino's party rolls box has fun activities for her to do to keep her occupied while guys
watch the big sports game.
Oh, they're watching football. And it's too real to be funny, but it is still funny. She's coming in with snacks, placing them in front of men who are completely ignoring her. She's apologizing for interrupting them. And she's saying, I got to feed my hungry guys. And that's women in media.
Another place where women are not super promoted in the world we live in is as CEOs or heads of companies. And one of the reasons for that is that women aren't offered as much money in the venture capital system. The venture ecosystem, comprising of venture capitalists, founders, and startup leaders, remains predominantly male, despite recent efforts to focus more attention on gender diversity within the industry. 3 types of barriers help to explain the continued marginalization of women as venture capitalists. Data and research prove that there is a significant gender gap in venture capital funding. Even though women are underrepresented as entrepreneurs to begin with, they receive a disproportionately small share of VC funding, 2.3% for all female founding teams and 10.4% for mixed gender founding teams. These numbers have stagnated in the last 3 decades as the 30-year average of all female founders' share of VC is 2.4%. Generally, female female founders receive approximately a quarter of the amount of funding they seek, while their male counterparts receive half on average.
The only way that a woman can be CEO isn't by founding her own company. There's a lot of big companies who promote their leaders from inside. Out of the 2024 list of Fortune 500 companies, which are the 500 most successful companies, 52 CEOs are women. That's 10%. And that's an improvement because a lot
Is
of
that
big companies,
biological?
yeah, it's got to be biological. 10 years ago, Nike came under fire for not having many women CEOs. I've worked in apparel my whole life. And the good part about that is that most of my peers and my immediate bosses are women. And then their bosses are usually women. But when you get to a very visible glass ceiling, and I was talking about it when I was working there, I'm like, isn't it funny how my boss is a woman and her boss is a woman, but after that, it's all men? Oh, well,
It's men all the way up. It's just the natural order of things.
A lot of this is because it's only been since the 60s since women have really had reproductive rights.
And even been allowed to work.
And we're losing reproductive rights in this country. We've lost Roe v. Wade. And the only reason that we even have 10% of women as CEOs in the Fortune 500 is because since the 60s, we have been able to choose when we didn't have children.
Well, we've had access to reproductive autonomy.
What's sad about 10% is that there has been a huge focus on promoting women from within and promoting women to leadership positions over the last decade. And that's as far as we've gotten.
Right. In office spaces, which are traditionally reserved for white men, you see the promotion and rise of women envisioned as a threat. Research shows that when a woman or person of color is promoted to the head of a company, the productivity of white men in leadership of that company actually decreases because they no longer feel that the business represents them anymore. Indirectly, there's a reluctance to see women and people of color at the top, but also a sabotage that happens, an extreme lack of support that follows because white male identity is tied to seeing white leaders thriving, telling women in POC what to do, and never the opposite.
And the thing is that having a diverse workforce is good for every company because their customers are diverse. Having a diverse workforce prevents horribly tone-deaf marketing, product design. It's a strength. It's not a weakness.
And I feel like the thing you're talking about with reproductive rights, if we had at least one female president in the last 200 years, maybe that wouldn't be such an easy thing to sway.
I think we all agree over and over again that only men can be president because that's how it's always been. That's a funny thing. I mean, when I say funny, I mean extremely frustrating about double standards and gender roles is there's this idea of like, well, how it's always been is how it's supposed to be. A woman raising kids at home, that's a natural thing. A man who raises kids is kind of a loser. We were talking about a TikTok where Michael Keaton was talking about Mr. Mom. We just lost the great Terry Garr, but in that film, she's the businesswoman and he's between jobs. So she's like, why don't you take care of the kids? And as unusual as that is today, it was unheard of in the 80s. It was just bizarre.
Just not even a thing.
And he's like, looking back, it was a little comedy movie, but I think it was important because people had to stop and say, well, why is that?
Right.
Why is that a married woman without a job is a homemaker and a married man without a job is a loser?
Exactly. And you saw him going through all these internal struggles about his worth and value. And eventually the character gratefully arrives at the conclusion that he can do this and he's actually pretty good at it. And he got a lot of joy out of it. But I think it's really difficult for a lot of men to do that. Going back to the VC conversation, VCs evaluate founders through a gendered lens and speak to replicate past examples of success through pattern matching, which leads female founders to be seen as riskier bets, while male founders are viewed as higher status. As a result, VCs evaluate male founders more positively and are more likely to fund their startups. Moreover, academic research has documented several manifestations of gender bias in the way investors evaluate founders and their pitches. In one study, researchers found that VCs prefer to fund pitches narrated by a male voice and rated them as more persuasive, logical, and fact-based than identical pitches narrated by a female voice.
The other side of this is that most iterations of Siri and Google, the default is a woman's voice because people feel more comfortable telling a woman's voice what to do.
There were all these men who had basically started verbally abusing their Siris and
wow.
having fake girlfriends and eventually turning on them.
And the sad thing about teachers and venture capitalists and people who are in positions to guide or to give something out, if you ask them, are you a feminist or do you think men and women are equal? A lot of them would say yes. They're not making decisions. They're not saying, okay, there's a little boy and he's being disruptive, but I'm going to treat him positively. If there's a little girl who's being disruptive, I'm going to treat her negatively because she's not supposed to be like that.
No, they are unconscious biases. I don't think every venture capitalist is a horrible sexist, but the proof is in the pudding. VCs use gender biased language to describe and assess entrepreneurs, with men consistently portrayed as more positive and leader-like terms. Another study found that VCs ask female and male founders different questions as a part of the pitch process, and questions asked of men tend to confer advantage to them. Female founders have less access to VC networks that are critical for their success. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, venture fundraising, like entrepreneurship, is a strongly masculine domain, which inherently disfavors women.
I remember when your kid was littler and started coming back from school with a lot of information about women and men, and you were very surprised by it. It's so much of a part of society that, of course, kids are already talking about boys are better at this. And it's frustrating because as much as you are trying to control that line of rhetoric at home, as soon as he leaves the house, he's receiving messaging from other people, from commercials, of course, from YouTube, and it's very hard to control it.
I had the experience of giving him an Elsa doll, which he specifically begged me for in the middle of Target. She was very cool. When you got her wet, her clothes changed, which was fun. And so he tried to bring Elsa on a visit to his grandparents' house, and his grandfather and grandmother insisted that he leave it in the car because that was not a boy's toy.
I'm seeing someone now who was very interested in Star Wars action figures when he was young, and his parents were like, no, that's a doll. You're not allowed to play with dolls. The idea that having a sculpture of a character is going to change the sexuality of your child is a ridiculous idea, but it's sad how prevalent it is.
We talked about this statistic in an earlier episode. Why don't men have friends? Feel free to circle back to that one. Up to the age of 15, boys cry at a much higher rate than girls do, as noted by The Cure. But after 15, they stop. And one thing that I've been noticing at school, as there are some really quite awful bullies at my son's school, one of their biggest critiques of him is that he cries a lot. And the reason he cries a lot is because his mother forces him to cry a lot. And I feel like they're trying to take that away from him. I think it's really, really sad.
Speaking of the Cure song, Boys Don't Cry, I was reading about Robert Smith and the Cure because that's one of my main things. And he was talking about that song and said, I wrote it when I was 20, and it was just something I was feeling a lot about at the time, and that there were these prescribed gender roles that I didn't want to have any part of. And then when I got a bit older, when it was still a very popular song, I was like, well, this song is stupid. It's a little bit like facile. It's like, it's got that embarrassing sincerity of youth, and it has no subtlety to it. But he's come back around on the song because hundreds of boys have told him, boys and men, how important it was to them.
Absolutely.
And like how much they resonate with it. Because as much as Robert was growing up in post-war England and feeling very restricted by gender roles, people are still suffering under that today. And I do think that that's part of why goth as a culture, if you can call it a culture, has always been more fluid. Don't get me wrong, goths are still incredibly sexist, but the gender roles are not as tightly prescribed.
I remember in high school, I hung out with a lot of boys who wore tights and skirts and wore more eye makeup than I did.
And regular straight boys, but they felt a little bit freer to experiment and to express themselves in a different way.
Right. And so there are real stakes in this gender bias game. For example, in extreme scenarios such as in sub-Saharan Africa and Western Asia, girls of every age are more likely to be excluded from education than boys. For every 100 boys out of school in these regions, 115 and 123 girls, respectively, are denied the right to education due to deeply ingrained gender norms. Not only boys aren't allowed to cry, boys have a lot of emotional health problems, et cetera, et cetera. Women are being excluded from jobs. Kids are not being allowed to go to school. It does affect us all, but I think it affects women in a much more obvious way.
It is one of my recurring themes that misogyny is a toxic soup that we're all swimming in and we're all eating it. And it's hurting all of us.
It is hurting all of us,
but it's hurting women in a little more of a visible way.
Right. Compared to men, women are generally perceived as less credible and less reliable, a reality noted by scholars as the gender credibility gap. This gap is problematized most frequently in the light of sexual harassment claims, but is also applicable to asylum claims. Female asylum seekers often flee from sexual violence, making it especially relevant. The research suggests that the effect of perceived non-reliability would be exacerbated if the caseworker is male, but remains relevant even if the caseworker is female, making the policy suggestion of more female caseworkers superfluous, as they may be equally susceptible to similar misogynistic biases. A 2011 report by Asylum Aid found that women were systematically disbelieved and that the uniquely female experience was often misunderstood and their persecution based on gender was routinely dismissed.
I want to bring up something that's very sensitive, and I've been trying to figure out if we can even talk about it on this podcast, but it relates so much to gender bias that I think it's important. There's a trial happening in France right now, and it has to do with a man, Dominique Pellicot, and his wife, Giselle. He essayed her for years, and it's really terrible. But she has made the decision to appear in court and to be a tool for the prosecution in a way that is really difficult and really challenging. And she's a woman in her 70s, but she's doing it because she wants to change culture around these kind of cases. So she's a grandmother, and the defense for her husband is going to the same playbook that they have always used for women in sexual assault cases. They're trying to make it look like she is sexually promiscuous. They're asking her why she isn't crying more in court. They are trying to paint her as someone who is deserving of repeated essay. But when you're dealing with someone who's a grandmother who has been a man's wife for years and years and years, and you're still asking, well, how short was your skirt? Were you really unaware of this? It throws it into sharp relief. And she's said, I'm not just doing this for myself. I'm doing this for all women. I am putting myself in a very difficult position because this gender bias around this crime has got to stop. And she's like, I don't have anything to be ashamed of. This man and these men have something to be ashamed of. This is one of the most visible ways that gender bias is harmful for women, because smearing the victim has been an important part of the legal system playbook for years and years.
Absolutely. And I think also, if you look at her history, she kept going to the doctor with all of these physical complaints because, for those who don't know, what was happening was that she was being drugged and forced to have non-consensual sex with a variety of men. But she kept going to the doctor, and she didn't understand why she was picking up all these STDs, and she was having all these infections, and all these things were happening to her. And they just kept kind of putting her off because women are not believed. And this happens a lot with women in medicine. This year, the Journal of American Heart Association reported that women who visited emergency departments with chest pain waited 29% longer than men to be evaluated for a heart attack.
Yeah. And that really is killing women. Our pain claims are not being taken as seriously. It takes longer to get us in for heart attack symptoms. And it all comes down to we're really not as good.
One more factoid about that. An analysis of 981 emergency room visits showed that women with acute abdominal pain were up to 25% less likely than their male counterparts to be treated with opioid painkillers.
Fun.
In closing, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
Kendra brought up
a sticky wicket.
Sticky wicket. And it touches on a lot of things that we've talked about before, because I think that the idea that women are not quite as good as men is a central part of our podcast and what we're talking about. To the man in the retirement home who said that our podcast was okay, not earth-shattering. Sorry.
We thank you.
Thank you for the feedback. Feedback is a gift. The small ways that gender bias shows up in friendships, relationships, support of one's peers are all trickle-down effects from the big ways in which gender bias affects us. So I think all things are worth looking at and examining. I encourage women to take a good look at how you treat your men friends, acquaintances, your friends' husbands. Are you treating them with deference and with an authority that they don't deserve? Stop. These are just dudes.
And I've had that experience recently. I think since my father died, I've stopped giving any kind of credence to older white men, and they really don't like it. I went to go visit a friend because I was celebrating her. She had an accomplishment that I was trying to celebrate, but her dad happened to be visiting, and he was very, very put off by the fact that I didn't ask him how he was doing, right, and defer to him and wonder if he was comfortable and was he having a good week. He was very, very irritated, and he stormed stormed off and went off to a room by himself because he felt like I wasn't giving him this undeserved respect.
BOOHOO. Laura, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
For my final thoughts, I'm just going to read from Robert Jensen's article, Tough Love for Mediocre White Guys. Getting white men to give up dominance is a challenge. I'm not special, but I live in a culture that designates people who look like me as a standard. A white supremacist, patriarchal, and capitalist society props up white guys, not because we're superior, but precisely because we are not. White guys need the unearned advantages to keep alive the fantasy that we deserve to be on top. I am not arguing that every white man is mediocre, writes Oluo. She wrote a book about mediocre white men. What I'm saying is that white male mediocrity is the baseline, the dominant narrative, and that everything in our society is centered around preserving white male power, regardless of white male skill or talent. The rewarding of white male mediocrity not only limits the drive and imagination of white men, it also requires forced limitations on the success of women and people of color in order to deliver on the promised white male supremacy. White male mediocrity harms us all.
Very well said. Laura, where can people find you on the internet if they want to find out more about you or your business?
They can find me at lauraryan.org. If you're interested in the TikTok, you can find me at I am Laura Ryan on TikTok. If you're interested in finding out more about our podcast, you can go to mysistersatherapist.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, My Sister's a Therapist Instagram. Virginia, if somebody wanted to follow your comedy career, how would they go about doing so?
You can find me at www.badinia.com, BADINIA. You can also find me at TikTok on Badinia, where I actually put up some TikToks this week that I'm pretty excited about. That's also my Instagram. Speaking of spelling, I'm on a bunch of shows, and one of the shows, my first name was really butchered, just in a new way that it's not usually butchered. I wrote the person and said, hey, could you help me out? And he said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm usually so good with checking this, but I'm like, people make mistakes. Sometimes people think that Virginia starts with a V-E-R. But V-E-R-G-I-N-A was what it was. And it's not even close.
Virginia.
Yes. But what's funny is that this individual, who's an awesome person, and thank you so much for booking me on your shows, and I like you very much, also has a very unusual name. And I'm like, how are you going to do me like this? How are you going to do me like this?
Was this a white male?
Yeah.
Got it.
As it happens. Laura, this is the part of the show where you sometimes read a listener review. Do you have one to share this week?
Yes. Ironically, this Apple podcast review was written by a man, Kevin Gallegos. He says, a great podcast. My Sister's a Therapist is an amusing trawl through the endless caverns of family dysfunction. Virginia's wit is sharp and cutting, each joke like a cigarette flicked into the abyss, while Laura, a licensed marriage and family therapist, grounds it all with care and empathy, a voice that has spent its life stitching people back together. This is not just a podcast. It's an exploration of survival, of sisterhood, and of how we claw our way out of the wreckage and find something to laugh about in the ruins.
Kevin, I forgot how beautiful this review was. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the first time I read it, I cried. So thank you, Kevin. Kevin, that's exactly what we're all about, in spite of what some mediocre white man in the retirement community said about us.
This is another excellent listener suggestion for a topic. If you have a topic you would like to suggest, you can write us at hello@mysistersatherapist.com. If you would like to hire us or sponsor us, we are open to doing things for money.
If you're one of the CFOs of Imperfect Foods, Liquid Death, Waterloo, Sunday Riley, AAA, Costco, and Target,
we would love to be part of your organization. And you can write us at hireuss@mysistersatherapist.com. And now, in the immortal words of Billy Ray Valentine Capricorn, we would like to remind you, we can make it, baby.
Me and you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.